One of the most popular urban fantasy tropes is to divide the fairies into good summer and evil winter courts, or the good Seelie and evil Unseelie. Having good fairies and evil fairies seems so convenient that I get asked a lot if the Unseelie courts are from folklore or something invented by sleep-deprived, coffee-fueled writers, fanficking relationships with magical bad boys and girls. The answer is that most writers are fanficking the magical world of their dreams, well strung out on coffee. That's what writers do. Still, not only is the Unseelie and Seelie court a part of Scottish folk tradition, the dichotomy of good and evil is common throughout Celtic lands and northern Eurasia. A smidgen over 200 years ago, in 1819, the Edinburgh magazine stated that the Seelie court of fairies was primarily made up of babies who had cruel parents that nice fairies would take to fairyland to be raised properly, the spirits of people who fell in battle, and good people who died but weren't good enough to go to heaven, but were still okay. I mean, they weren't evil. The Unseelie court, however, was made up of those who had died in wicked wars, people who were considered wicked, unmarried women who died in childbirth, and children who died without being baptized. Okay, so a lot of that is pretty messed up, but such beliefs were relatively common. People who died while suffering or young children, not yet made part of the community, often became dangerous ghosts and vampires. Indeed, the spirits of dead children were one of the most common forms of ghosts in places as far away as Japan. So creepy children have been a part of pop culture for a very long time. Plus, fear of the unclean and corrupt dead is practically universal, so it would make sense for these to get rolled into kingdoms of evil spirits in some places. Not all spirits of the dead were bad, however. The folklorist Eva Pox points out that from the Celts to the people of the Baltic, the outlines of a common Indo-European inheritance emerge. This is connected to the cult of the dead, bringing fertility. In other words, the spirits of the dead and the gods of the dead were heavily connected with the success of crops. In Milan in 1384, there were women who were believed to be part of a society of people, both living and dead, who would travel about at night in order to promote fertility, health, and social welfare. Like the spirits of the dead, the fairies could be good as well as bad. The folklorist Catherine Briggs stated that there is a definite tradition of benevolent and malevolent fairies. The pretty bright fairies were always draped in white, with wands in their hands and flowers in their hair. So yes, the good flowery fairies that little girls love to draw are actually a thing. People in rural England would even have little girls perform a ritual play in order to ask the fairies to protect against evil fairies. In northern England, people would often sweep the hearth and place clean water out for the fairies to drink and draw baths from before going to bed. The idea was that fairies might come down the chimney at any time. Those who heard their footsteps gambling about at night would receive prosperity. In other words, there is a clear tradition of good and evil spirits. The Komi people have a series of myths about two brothers who created the world. Sometimes these brothers were frogs in a swamp or ducklings traveling in an endless ocean with their mother. One day their mother laid some eggs, but because there was no land, the eggs sank into the water. The brothers dove into the water to retrieve these eggs. Their mother died, and from her came all land. From the eggs, one brother created angels, humans, and good things of the earth. The other brother, meanwhile, being jealous, used the eggs to create evil spirits. Most other Uralic people have similar myths of two brothers who create the world, one creating evil and the other creating good. What this means is that the idea of dividing the world into good and evil spreads well beyond the bounds of Christianity, and so could be a very old idea in Scotland. Indeed, it is a common idea in all the Celtic lands. In Brittany, France, the wicked fairies were angry with the good fairies for being kindly towards humanity, and so the good fairies were often forced to hide in animal form. In Cornwall there were pixies who, while mischievous, could be helpful, and spriggans who in stories lived like bandits. Like fairies, witches were often divided into two systems, good and wicked. In Eastern Europe, these evil witches often worked with snakes and would steal the life from the crops and milk from people's cows. A folklorist named Emma Wilby points out that good and wicked witches were both taken into fairyland, but had different experiences there. The good witches celebrated in hills, and the wicked witches celebrated on the moors and in the forests. So there was clearly a difference between good and wicked witches and the fairies they worked for. One shouldn't get too hung up on the Seelie and Unseelie, however, because fairies were mutable. Those that were normally kind could be cruel, and those that were normally cruel could engage in random acts of kindness. There's another thing to keep in mind here. Europe had a widespread traditional belief that one could steal the ability to produce a rich harvest from a farm by taking dew or dirt from it. Thus, the fairies and witches could improve their own harvest by stealing the life from their neighbor's land. There are a number of stories that indicate that many wars were fought over this. An old Irish man from Munster had a garden which suffered blight, and it was believed this was because of the Ulster fairies. Furious, the old man took up his blackthorn cane and ran out into the garden, calling out to the king of the Munster fairies to take him and his neighbors to help fight against the Ulster fairies. So Fairyland was often divided along county or clan lines, and Scotland had a lot of clans. This means that Fairyland could also be thought of as an us versus them. Yes, people often thought of their enemies as evil, but that doesn't mean they were. Further, it doesn't seem that good and evil courts were necessarily associated with summer and winter, at least not entirely. Certainly in many places, the undead, such as vampires, were far more likely to be seen around Christmas time, which is a winter holiday. In Scotland, however, winter is personified by a goddess/hag figure named Calice Var. She was reborn each All Hallows and would smite the earth with her staff to call down the snow. She is an interesting and complex figure and is the guardian spirit of deer, wild goats, cattle, and wolves. There are many stories that feature her in one way or another, but in none of these is she the queen of a fairy court, and so she seems unlikely to be involved with the Unseelie court in any way. In Wales, Gwynap Nuv appears to be the god of winter. He is the king of the fairies, but is often helpful to King Arthur, and he battles against evil spirits. So he is also unlikely to be connected with the Unseelie fairies. So the Seelie and Unseelie fairy courts do not seem to be connected to winter, and aren't always as important as political divisions in Fairyland. I hope you found that interesting. Please like and subscribe if you did.